Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sports Porch. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Jeffrey Anderson. So this episode, two topics. I want to keep it, I guess, sort of short and sweet. A little more focused today on these two topics. Haven't talked about them in a while, so that's the reasoning behind that. So we'll talk about some Formula One today. The 70th Anniversary Grand Prix at Silverstone happened, the second race at the circuit. And then we'll also talk about some major golf. We had some major championship golf this last weekend. PGA Championship at TPC Harding Park. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. So this previous weekend, we had the second race at Silverstone, the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. And this was a really good race to watch. And the main reason for this is because somebody other than Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas won. So if you didn't see, Mercedes did not win this race. Max Verstappen of Red Bull, who has been really their only challenger this year, ended up beating them. And so what I want to do for this race is just kind of go team by team and just sort of give a breakdown of how their performances went over the course of the race, basically. So I'm going to do this in order of how the team's best driver finished. So we'll look at Red Bull first, since Max Verstappen won, then Mercedes, etc. So let's go ahead and start off with Red Bull. So obviously, great race from Verstappen. He ended up beating Mercedes. It was a good race from Albon as well, but the problem with Albon is he needs to improve his qualifying. So once again, Max Verstappen qualified fourth, ended up winning the race. And this is because he had a different strategy going into the race than everyone else. So he started in qualifying. He used hard tires for the qualifying. And in Formula One, whatever tires you use for for your qualifying session, you have to use the same tires to start the race. And Silverstone this weekend was a hot track. Temperatures on the track were getting up to 40 degrees Celsius, which is around 100 degrees Fahrenheit for the American viewers, which is everyone. Trust me, I get confused watching the races too. They show everything in Celsius and kilometers per hour. All that junk. Anyway, so this meant that while Verstappen's tires were a little slower during qualifying because he did place fourth, he did make up the gap throughout the race, and the durability of the tires and his tire management really went a long way. He stayed on the track for a very long time in that first set of hards. He got out to such a great lead because Mercedes, we'll discuss later, were having their own tire problems. He was right along Valtteri Bottas when he came out of the pits from eventually pitting, and he was a full pit stop ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And he was able to pass Valtteri within like 2 or 3 corners maybe. And from that point on, it was basically smooth sailing for Max Verstappen. Really good stuff out of him. Very consistent effort for Max. And he showed that when Mercedes has an off day like this, he can expose their weaknesses and take advantage of them and really put on a good performance. So congrats to Max Verstappen being the first non-Mercedes driver to win a race this year. As for his teammate, Alex Albon, he had a really good race as well, finished fifth, but it just begs the question of when can he put it all together for Red Bull and finally get a podium. So this week he qualifies 9th on the grid to start off. Last week at the same track, Silverstone, qualifies 12th, and because of this finishes 8th. Week before that at Hungary, qualifies 13th, but then manages to finish 5th. Then at the Styrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring, second race of the year, he qualified 7th, but then comes back to finish 4th. And then the first race of the year, he qualified 5th, which is his best qualifying to date, but that was obviously the Lewis Hamilton where he got punted off the track, spun out. And then eventually he would retire due to a power unit issue anyway. People discussed whether or not he could have won the race. It looked like he was ready to win the race if it hadn't been for the power unit. Anyway, the point is, he obviously has the stuff to win a race. whether it be him or the car. I think that he can get on that podium. It's just a matter of his qualifying. His qualifying, as we've seen, has been, for Red Bull standards, pretty bad this season. And this could be on Albon being bad at qualifying, or is this on maybe Red Bull, like we saw last year a little bit with Pierre Gasly, where they were sort of prioritizing Max Verstappen and kind of pushing Gasly off to the side, not really giving him the attention that he needed in the practice sessions and the qualifying. But if Red Bull ever wants to, in the future, get a sniff at the Drivers' Championship against Mercedes, they need their second guy, who I think can be Albon. I think Albon has the driving alone to be their second guy. I think he's much better than Gasly ever was in that second seat already. But he simply needs to qualify better. And that's my main knack on Alex Albon. Is that they're second this year because of Ferrari's woes, basically driving like a midfield team. But they cannot count on that every year. And whether that be changing out their second guy or giving Albon some more support, giving him better qualifying strategies, these are the steps Red Bull needs to take. Verstappen's always going to do well. He's shown time and time again, whatever car he's in, whatever situation, he will put out a good drive for you. And it's the second guy, really, that they need to give help, and they need to figure out how to get the most out of him without sacrificing Verstappen's time and effort they put into him, because it's obviously going to pay dividends for them to do that. Now, let's go over to the Mercedes side of things. So even with their tire blistering, they still finished second and third, right? And it just shows that they're still just so far ahead of everyone else. But they could also struggle next week at Barcelona in Spain, which is also expected to be a pretty hot track. And like I said before, both drivers suffered from tire blistering. So what had happened was, it was a very hot day. Everyone in the top 10 started on medium tires, except for Max Verstappen, as previously mentioned. And Mercedes were really having a terrible time. You could see it on the television. There was just these lines running through the tires as they were going by. The blistering happening. So you're not getting as much grip, as much traction, not putting as much power down into the tarmac. And they still managed to finish second and third with this issue. It just boggles me how good Mercedes is. So there are a couple things to talk about with them, though. Lewis Hamilton finished second. Tire troubles all day, but he got some help with being second, mainly due to his team strategy. We will talk about that with Valtteri. He has, the best car on the grid, the best tire management on the grid out of any driver. And there's not really much to say there. Had a Lewis Hamilton race, if you will, even with the tire troubles. However, Valtteri Bottas, who qualified first, was on the pole for this race, leading it. He got screwed out of second place, I think, by his team strategy. So Mercedes had Valtteri Bottas, who was the team leader, or who was the race leader, ahead of Max Verstappen, way sooner than Lewis did. Meaning that when Lewis came into the pits later, he was eventually on the fresher tires, and it made it easier for him to eventually take P2 away from Valtteri. And this is almost a trouble in paradise situation, if you will. Oh, he finished P3 instead of P2. He still got a podium, whatever. But Valtteri was the better qualifier, and he led the race. He was in front of Verstappen until he was told to pit. And while it's very clear that Valtteri is the number 2 driver at Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton is the face of the sport. There's no way you're not going to prioritize him. In a race like this, where you have Valtteri leading, and where he qualifies first, it seems like he should be the one getting the priority. And yes, it's Lewis's home circuit, I get that, and he just had one last week. But moments like these little things here, these are what cause drivers to eventually leave. And Valtteri has been a great driver in this respect. He has been someone who has basically shut his mouth, kept to himself, done what is expected of him. He is a great second man for this Mercedes team, especially behind, as we've seen before, a very outspoken Lewis Hamilton at times. But that resentment eventually could begin to grow, and he could eventually leave this Mercedes team. Toto Wolff, who is a team principal for Mercedes, basically head coach equivalent of other sports, he came out after the race and said that they brought Valtteri in because they thought the tire wear was more severe than it originally was, and they decided to keep Lewis out a couple more laps after looking at the tires and evaluating the tire wear, which, that's cool. He can say whatever he wants, but I think it's pretty obvious why Valtteri, who's the race leader at that point, was brought in before Lewis. I'm not suggesting by any means this will lead to any turmoil this year. Valtteri Bottas is already locked up for next year in that second slot for Mercedes. But down the road, don't be surprised to see Valtteri Bottas, who has been an excellent teammate for Lewis Hamilton, up to this point, stayed quiet, stayed respectful. Don't expect him to stay happy with finishing second to Lewis all the time. So while both Mercedes did struggle for their standards, still finished second and third, both podiums. Next week, we will really see at a hot Barcelona track, though, if Mercedes can come over these tire issues that they had. See if it was the temporary lapse in the Mercedes machine of winning and domination. So then let's look at Ferrari next. And Ferrari, this is basically the same story they've had all year. Charles Leclerc did well, had a pretty good race, and Sebastian Vettel did not. Very sad to see from such a prominent team in the sport who's been around basically since the start. They're a midfield team this year. Charles Leclerc is just every race dragging a car to the line that's a midfield car, and he's putting it on podiums, putting it in fourth place. And it seems that Vettel cannot do anything with his car. And this is really souring his relationship with Ferrari. We'll talk about that a little later. Let's focus on Charles Leclerc a little bit for now. Qualified 8th, finished 4th. He once again just proves that he's a future star, or not a future star. He's a star of the sport, but he could potentially be a future face with Max Verstappen. Monster drive, dragging this car to 4th place. Just, this car isn't getting it done this year. And to me, it further cements his status as the second best rising star in the sport. I think Verstappen gets the edge because he seems to get slightly more out of his cars now, and I think that the Red Bull car, at least from years previously, is a objectively worse car than the Ferrari would normally be. That's obviously not the case this year. And Mercedes, he's able to challenge the Mercedes in a Red Bull car, which usually would finish third otherwise, I think, with another driver. So while Charles Leclerc had a great race, his teammate Sebastian Vettel just can't get anything going with the Ferrari, and it continues to make Sebastian look like he's making the right decision and leaving, at least for this year. It just does not seem like Ferrari's putting in the effort with Vettel this year, and, it makes sense because he isn't going to be coming back, so why would Ferrari care about developing a relationship with him, putting in all this extra time, effort to make things right when Vettel's just going to leave anyway? However, it does set the precedent for future drivers, such as a young Carlos Sainz from McLaren, who they have coming in next year. So the question is, how will he feel coming into this situation? Having beaten that Ferrari car from Vettel multiple times this year in his McLaren. Next year will be interesting for sure for Carlos Sainz to see how Ferrari adjusts to the change, if they can do any better. But for Sebastian Vettel, how does this look for him? He's consistently doing bad in races like this for Ferrari standards, because Leclerc is still getting decent results. And you could say that while Seb is salty, for Ferrari not wanting to keep him, that is causing him to coast through the year, which is understandable. If you're not going to be with this team for long, it makes sense, to just go in the corner and pout about it and whatnot. But it does ask the question, what will potential future suitors think of this? So while they can take this as Ferrari screwing Vettel over and not really caring that much, or they could also take it as Vettel not caring enough now that he's gonna knows that he's gonna be gone. So I mean, either way though, I don't think that these results will help Vettel at all. You know, he's aging, he's getting up there. It's pretty clear at this point that he wants to be a first seat driver for a winning team, and there aren't just many spots for that available in the sport right now, especially when you have so many bright young guys who would willing to be taking a number 2 role even. You know, we're seeing this with Carlos Sainz. He's been a great number 2 driver for another young driver, Lando Norris, at McLaren. And it really does ask the question, will Vettel even be on an F1 team next year? I think, while he does deserve a seat in F1, I'm not sure if he will want to take a midfield seat. You know, so pretty sad to see this happening to him. All the best for him going forward. Hopefully he does get a seat in F1 because he's a great driver to watch. Always been a class act. So for Ferrari, summing things up, Charles Leclerc continues to impress in a midfield car, and Sebastian Vettel seems to be coasting through the year without concern for where he finishes, really. Hopefully Ferrari can turn things around next year. This has been, to say a disaster this year would be a little bit of an understatement for them. They were supposed to be challenging Mercedes, you know, for the Drivers' Cup. And that's not happening this year. Best of luck to Ferrari going forward. Hopefully they can figure it out. So the next best team finishes came from Racing Point. And even with getting knocked down by a points penalty, they'll still put in good results. They seem to be challenging to be the best of the rest so far. So for those of you who did not hear, they received a 15,400,000 euro, which is around $470,000 in the U.S. Penalty for having the same rear brake duct design from Mercedes from their championship car last year. So it's no secret that that Mercedes had been selling parts to Racing Point, right? And everyone has been calling them, you know, the pink Mercedes, how they're just copying Mercedes. And this basically just proves that point, right? So what had happened was Mercedes had sold them the designs for the rear brake ducts, and they copied them this year, which wasn't an issue in the past, but with the new rules coming into 2020, the FIA determined that it was a problem, and so they took care of it. But they also said that it's not going to affect them for the rest of the year. They're just going to give them this penalty here, and they want them next year to change it and not use those designs. So let's talk about the actual racers for now. So Lance Stroll continues to get, I think, a little too much hate for being a pay driver, which is pretty clear he is. But I think he's also proven himself to be someone who can stay in this Racing Point / Aston Martin seat for a long time. He qualified 6th and he finished 6th, which is about the best you can ask for at the circuit with the cars that were ahead of him. So for those of you who don't know, when I talk about a pay driver is someone who comes into a team strictly because they have a lot of money or because they have a lot of sponsorships they will bring in. And this is the case with Lance Stroll because, pardon me, I got a lot of crap in my throat today. So his dad, Lawrence Stroll, is literally the team owner of Racing Point. So for many, as long as daddy is the owner of the team and has a say in the matter money-wise, Stroll's always going to have a seat guaranteed in this team. Now, this makes a lot of people angry. They get really upset over this. They call him a pay driver, say, "Oh, daddy's seat," whatever. But this doesn't mean that Lance deserves all this hate he receives. Because I believe this year especially, he's shown that he can be a solid driver on the grid. And he can be someone that can be competitive for 4th, 5th place, you know, consistently in races. Since the start, when he and seemingly everyone else DNF'd at the first race back at the Red Bull Ring, he has yet to finish outside of the top 10, even getting as high as P4 at Hungary 2 weeks ago. And he's solid at qualifying. So he will continue, I think, to put solid drives behind the wheel of this Racing Point and Aston Martin in the future when they later change. And he could be a fantastic second driver in the future if they want to bring in somebody, maybe like a Sebastian Vettel for next year or 2 years. Who knows? But for now, for Lance Stroll, he just needs to continue to put his head down, put in the work, and prove himself in the old-fashioned way, and really prove all of these haters and doubters wrong. So that's Lance Stroll. Now let's talk about the replacement driver for this week and last week, Nico Hülkenberg. So he was filling in for Sergio Perez, who was out with COVID-19, and he was really good in qualifying this week. Really impressive. Qualified on a podium, Q3, but he wasn't good enough in the race, simply put. He finished behind his teammate, finished in 7th. And these past 2 races, to me, really haven't helped Nico in the respects of getting a future seat in Formula 1 for a mid-tier team. Last week, he qualified 13th, and he didn't get a chance to prove himself in that race, however, because his car wouldn't even get off the starting line. But this week, he really had a chance to prove himself. You know, you qualify 3rd, and you just kind of blew it. I think, you know, he finished below his teammate even, Lance Stroll, who qualified 6th, who finished in the same position. So I really am not sure that this will put much confidence in these mid-table teams who may want to pick someone up, especially when, you know, Nico is already 32 years old, definitely on the latter end of his career, and there's still plenty of young talent out there, whether it be in the academy or just out on the grid in general. So I really do feel bad for Nico because he is someone who's fun to watch. He's really easy to like. But, I mean, in all of his years of racing, he still doesn't have a podium in F1. And I think that's kind of telling of the driver who he is. You know, he's very respectable, very likable guy, but he just doesn't quite have what it takes to really push his team to the next level. So I really do feel bad for him. So Racing Point, at this point in the year, are kind of the villains, right? Sort of the self-diagnosed villains of the rest. But I do still think that they're putting out good results, even if they do copy Mercedes. So, like, with the Racing Point, a lot of people say they copy Mercedes. It's the only reason why they win is because they copy Mercedes. Well, if the FIA isn't going to do anything about it, which they have this year, it looks like, why wouldn't they? You know, why wouldn't they say to themselves, hey, we can build the championship car from last year. If you could do that, if you were in this position where you literally had the opportunity to build the championship winning car from last year, put it in your car, would you do it to get some wins? I think I would. Is it the right thing to do? Maybe not. You could say that. But overall, I think that Racing Point is getting a little too much hate. And I get it. I understand why people are angry at them. But don't get mad at them. Get mad at the FIA for not putting their foot down and not enforcing this soon enough. So those are my thoughts on Racing Point. I hope that they continue to have good results. I like both their drivers, Lance Stroll and Sergio Perez. Hopefully he can come back and do well next week because that's when he is coming back. So the next team on the grid who finished, Renault. Really great result from Esteban Ocon. Ricciardo, not so much, although Renault been letting him down ever since he's been here. So let's talk about Esteban Ocon. He qualified 11th, finished in 8th. This year he's really been proving that he's still a good, feisty driver who can cause competition for the first driver, for better or for worse. He really hit his groove his past couple of races. Silverstone last week, he finished 6th. And he hasn't finished below his qualifying spot in any race this year besides the first race where everybody was DNFing. So hopefully he can keep this momentum going. I like him as a driver. He's got a lot of heart, got a lot of drive. And while he's very passionate about his racing, this does get him into trouble at times. He gets a little overzealous in moments. He takes some moves, keeps his spot where he probably shouldn't. And this will lead to tension between teammates at times. This is what happened at the Racing Point / Force India team. Him and Sergio Perez had, they went back and forth. I think at one point they even wrecked each other. So it'll be interesting to see how next year, with Ricciardo leaving, you have Fernando Alonso coming in, who is known to be a brat when it comes to, priority, and just overall his attitude has never been very good in the sport. So it'll be interesting to see how Esteban Ocon, who is someone who is in the past known to sort of get on the nerves a little bit of the first driver, to see how those two will get along. And that should be a very interesting talking point there. As for Daniel Ricciardo, he qualified 5th, finished in 14th. Really disappointing result this race in what has been a really solid year for the Aussie so far. He finished 4th at the same track last week, and he hadn't had a finish before this except for 8th, except for that DNF at the beginning of the year, which everyone else had, basically. And I still think that he's one of the best drivers on the grid. He just has a car that has consistently let him down over the past 2 years. It's really sad to see Daniel Ricciardo, such a talented driver in his prime years, having them wasted at Renault. Well, he could still, potentially have been at Red Bull with Max Verstappen, tearing up the courses, potentially winning drives, winning championships. It's really sad to see from Ricciardo. Hopefully he does better next year at McLaren. Hopefully they give him a better car to use. So Renault this year are 6th in the constructors standing so far. This kind of perfectly sums them up as a team. Toward the bottom of the midfield teams, even with having 2 solid drivers. That's my thing with Renault. They just cannot build a strong enough car to support their team. And it's really sad to see, because I think Esteban Ocon is a pretty decent driver, and I think Ricciardo is still a top 5 driver on the grid. So hopefully next year, Renault can sort of beef their car up and get a little more competitive. So now let's talk about that team that Ricciardo is going to next year, McLaren. This week was a really disappointing result from them. And so far, they've been excellent this year. They've had looks of the best of the rest. You have Lando Norris, who this race couldn't really do anything, qualified 10th, finished 9th, but he has had a phenomenal year. This year he really got put on the map. P3 at the Red Bull Ring, has only finished outside of the top 5 this race. This is the only race he has. And at Hungary, where he also qualified pretty poorly. And he's only 20 years old in that F1 seat. He's younger than I am. That's crazy to think. He is a stud in the making. McLaren have a star in their hands. He's, I would say, the 3rd best driver out of that young core, out of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc. And then I think you have Lando Norris in that next spot. He's currently 5th in the driver standings, which places him firmly in the hunt for the best of the rest of the drivers. So really proud of Lando Norris. He's such a good kid. Really has a positive attitude, always making jokes, always a fun guy to watch. So Carlos Sainz, his teammate, he qualified 13th and finished there. Also had a bad results for his standards this year, and he looks to continue on his solid resume before he heads off to a worse team. Those are just jokes. It might not be a worse team next year, but Ferrari looks like a worse team this year. He's done what has been asked of him as a second driver. He lets the first seat guy, which is Lando Norris, pretty clearly, get all the glory while he grinds out for some points. With this race on the last, it's the only times this year where he's finished outside of the points. And he kind of has to be asking himself, why am I leaving this team with what's happening next year, with Ferrari and what's happened this year with Vettel? Obviously, you can't pass up the opportunity to take a seat in the Scarlet Red car. That's a prestigious brand, and he's probably getting paid a pretty penny to do it as well. But he will be questioning this year, at least, if they can be better when he gets there. I think that when he does get there, he'll be a great number 2 for Charles Leclerc, nonetheless, and he will stay out of his way, which is the most important part, and that's what Ferrari wants, right? They know Charles Leclerc is their guy going forward, and they want Sainz to be that second guy. And I think that Carlos Sainz, taking this role, knew what he was getting into, and I think that he's perfectly fine with that. So McLaren this year, they've been excellent. They've been, for my money, the best of the rest for what was expected of them coming in the year. Just off their game at Britain, it seems, which sucks considering technically this is their home circuit, because McLaren is British. But overall, good season so far from McLaren. Next, let's talk about the AlphaTauri team. This is Red Bull's secondary team that they have on the grid. And Pierre Gasly has been great for them this year. Now he's got the pressure of Red Bull off of him. He said this himself. He doesn't want to go back to that second seat at Red Bull. He really likes it in the AlphaTauri cars. Very obvious. While Danny Kvyat has really struggled as per the course. Pierre Gasly wasn't quite as good as he's been. He qualified 7th, finished just outside the points at 11. But he still has put in really good drives with the AlphaTauri this year. He has said, like I said before, Red Bull seat is not in his calling. And it really, to me, does show how much more comfortable he is driving with the second team. He's finished 7th multiple times this year, well within the points. And that's all you could ask from the AlphaTauri being a secondary car, to the Red Bull. So it's very good to see him in a happy place. Whereas Daniel Kvyat, he had a really good drive this race. He qualified 16th, pretty bad, but did finish 10th inside the points. This is definitely his best drive of the year. And hopefully this is the spark for him that he hasn't been able to find for the entire year. This is just his second time finishing within the points. First was at the Styrian Grand Prix, the Red Bull Ring. But I'm not sure how many more races he can be competitive and get points with the AlphaTauri. Another Academy driver might get the spot in the future if Red Bull feels that Kvyat is sort of meddling in the place, or if they want to bring in somebody to replace Albon down the future. They're going to have to bring them into the AlphaTauri team first to really get their feet wet. So, it really is a question, how long will Kvyat stay here with these sort of disappointing meddling results, if you will. So AlphaTauri had a pretty good race, and they've been pretty decent this year, as you would say. Pierre Gasly has been, for my money, excellent for this team. He's really been happy here. It's just Daniel Kvyat who's really been having the issues. So now let's talk about the rest. And what I mean by the rest is the bottom feeders. So you have Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams. These guys are all bottom feeders. Anytime I talk about F1, they will only come up maybe a little bit. Maybe I'll mention a guy here or there. And that's what I'm doing this week. I'm just going to mention a guy from one of these teams that I feel like actually deserves the attention. And that is George Russell. George Russell's the only guy I want to talk about here. And he qualifies so well in such a terrible car. He qualified 12th this race with the Williams car. He still finished 18th, and to me, this isn't his fault. He's qualified 12th in this race, and at the second Austrian race, the Styrian Grand Prix, and at Hungary. And it's really a shame that his car can't keep up with others in the race, or it seems to break down every time he's having a great race. And I would really love to see him take that second seat at Mercedes in the coming years. I think he'd be great number 2 with Lewis in the twilight of his career. And I think he could eventually look to take that first seat from Lewis whenever he decides to go off into the sunset. So I really like George Russell's outlook. I really like how he's driven this year. Really gotten a chance to prove himself in this Williams car. And I think his results in qualifying alone show that he has the potential to be a great driver for a better team. So then with that, let's look currently at the constructor standings. You have Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari at the top, followed by McLaren, Racing Point after that penalty, Renault, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and then Williams. Then the driver's standings, you have Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Valtteri Bottas as the top 3. You then have Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Lance Stroll, and Sergio Perez, all sort of in the midfield battle, as well as Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon, sort of an outside look for the top 10 drivers. So some interesting battles to look for here at the constructors and driver standings is Ferrari versus McLaren. First off, can the consistency of McLaren outpace the excellence of Charles Leclerc? Basically the whole year, Charles Leclerc has finished really well, Seb has finished really poorly, whereas for the McLaren side of things, both guys have finished very consistently in the midfield and done very well. Also, Racing Point versus the rest. So can they make up the ground they've lost after the 15-point penalty with their solid driving duo of Perez and Stroll? This will be very interesting to look at. I think as this week showed, I think with Lance Stroll, he'll be just fine. We'll have to see when Sergio Perez comes back. Also, Max Verstappen versus Valtteri Bottas. Max Verstappen's at 77 points right now. Valtteri Bottas is at 73. So can Verstappen hold off the Mercedes driver to finally take second in this Drivers' Championship? He's really been overshadowed by the Mercedes for years. He's really trying to break out of that and show what he can do. You also have Charles Leclerc versus Lando Norris versus Alex Albon. Leclerc leads this battle with 45 points, followed by Norris at 38. Then you have the Red Bull driver at 36 points. They are all sitting 4, 5, and 6 respectively in the Drivers' Championship. So will Ferrari's woes this year hold back Leclerc from topping Norris, who is currently thriving, currently the hot driver on the grid, besides Charles Leclerc? And then can Albon improve his qualifying to have a chance at taking fourth in the standings? This will be very interesting questions to see if they get answered. You also then have Lance Stroll versus Sergio Perez, the teammates there, and Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon, teammates at Renault. You have Lance Stroll at 28 points, Sergio Perez at 22, and then you have Daniel Ricciardo at 20 points and Esteban Ocon at 16. So the main question here is, who will prove better between the two respective drivers at each team? Will we see the young, feisty Ocon be able to take some spots away from the young vet? What am I saying? The older vet in Daniel Ricciardo? And can you see Sergio Perez sort of take that next step to get past Lance Stroll, and especially to get back on the track after having dealt with this COVID-19 stuff, missing out on some points that he potentially could have gotten? And there's only really one way to find out, and that's to see the end of the year and let the driving speak for itself. And then this is my most important question of the year. This is the question we have to have answered this year. Williams versus points. Can Williams score a single point this year? This is the question. They were so close at the first race of the year. There were 9 cars that got retired, leaving 10 cars in the points and 1 car out of the points. Guess who that 1 car was out of the points? It was a Williams. These poor guys. Haas has scored a point this year by virtue of that race. They've had a really good season so far for their standards, especially with George Russell. It's just, it's like, come on, George Russell, please give us a point. If George Russell finishes in the top 10 this year, that will be honestly insane. I'm really hoping so. I really like George Russell. I think that will really prove that he has what it takes to be a great F1 driver. If he can be a great F1 driver in this trash Williams car. So overall, so far, for the entire outlook of the Formula 1 season, really good season so far, I feel like. Besides Mercedes being the top dog and everything for the whole year by a long shot, there have been some surprise teams doing very well. You have McLaren and Racing Point have really taken the next step. Some teams have been really disappointing. Ferrari, Haas has been another one that's been very disappointing. And how shaken up in general, really, the standings have been this year. So I think that overall, this will be one of the most exciting ends to a Formula 1 season we've had in quite some time. Mainly for the midfield, not so much for the top. We've already established that we've got Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen. One of those orders, probably Hamilton at the top, unfortunately. But it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the field finishes out this year. Let's talk about some golf, shall we? Been a while since I talked about it. Same with Formula One now that I think about it. It's been since the first episode that I've talked about it way back when. So we had major championship golf this weekend. PGA Championship at TPC Harding Park, San Francisco, California. And all I have to say about this is just wow. Just wow. This is a great weekend of golf. So at the beginning of the year, in the first episode I did of this, I had a list of young golfers to watch for in the future who could be making their way up the standings, winning some tournaments, whatnot. This list consisted of Daniel Berger, Abraham Ancer, Victor Hovland, Matthew Wolff, and none other than Colin Morikawa. Won this weekend, shooting 13 under, had a pair of 69s to start his rounds off, finished with a 65 and a 64. He's amazing. He's looked so good this year. He's really been the hot golfer so far of the season. Before running this, he had finished second at the Charles Schwab Challenge, and then won the Workday Charity Open at Muirfield Village, the house that Jack built, in a shootout against Justin Thomas. And he's done all this at 23 years old. He's the third youngest to win the PGA Championship, behind Jack Nicklaus and Rory McIlroy, which is never too bad to be in the company of. Looked cool, calm, collected throughout the whole tournament, especially on that last round. Looked so nonchalant about it. Looked like he was just playing around a golf, just having some fun. He didn't have a single bogey in the last round. That is how you win championships. Staying perfect, staying out of the bogeys. And his shot of the day was, if you haven't seen it by now, really, I recommend you go watch it. Drivable par 4 on the 16th. Smashes the ball, drives the green, gets it within 7 feet of the hole, and then the really impressive part, gets up there for eagle to essentially put the dagger in the tournament, nails it. Really impressive from the guy. He's only turned pro for a year now, and I just love everything about this kid. I'm saying kid even though I'm older than him, or I'm younger than him. Anyway, expect him to win major championships in the future. I really like the outlook on Colin Morikawa. Has such an easy swing, such a beautiful backswing, especially. Really gathers himself, takes his time with it, and then unleashes all of that power. Really accurate. He's the future of the sport. Colin Morikawa. Please give me more of that. Another guy who was on my youngest list, or young stars list, was Matthew Wolff. He played really well. He's only 21. He's younger than I am. He shot a 10 under, tied for 4th. Shot a 69 in the first round, pair of 68s, and then a 65 to finish it out. His putting looked decent this weekend, but he was super accurate in his approach. He finished first in greens and regulation at 77%, and he's someone who will surely capture the attention of the public. He's got such a weird and fascinating swing. I mentioned this in the first episode as well. I'll elaborate on it here as well. So what he does is he starts with it's all his backswing really. It's so weird. He makes this jerking motion with his hips toward the target. It's like his kickstart, if you will. And then as he takes the club away, he brings it in an upward motion rather than an outward motion. And his left heel comes like way off the ground. It's really something to watch. And then on the way down, plants that left heel, club head shallows out, immediately just drops down to a normal, like what you see a normal backswing, and just lets it go. So unique, generates so much power from that drop, that immediate drop, all that energy going straight into the ball. I can't wait to see him win some majors later down the line. He's won previous tournaments in the past, the 3M Open he won last year. I think it's bound to happen sooner rather than later, especially when he's 3 months younger than I am, and I can barely hit an iron shot. It's crazy. Love Matthew Wolff. Another young guy who also did really well, finished 4th, familiar guy in the top 10 this year, Bryson DeChambeau. Shot a 68 his first round, 70 the next, and then finished with a pair of 66s. So if you guys haven't seen, during the break, during the COVID, he put on a bunch of muscle. They said it was like 30, 40 pounds of muscle, something like that. And it's really paid dividends. He has led the pack this season in strokes gained off the tee with a 1.175 and an average distance of 323.9 yards, just mashing the ball. And you can really see it when he swings. He's just swinging the heck out of the ball, especially on his driver shots. He just loads up, puts everything he has into it. He's, along with this, always been good at putting. He's 6th in strokes gained at .838 across the season. But it's really been that extra distance from the driver that's helped him get him closer to the hole. You know, he's able to take smaller wedge shots, which he's always been pretty decent with. He doesn't have to pull out the long irons as much anymore. And it's really reduced the amount of putts that he has to take, which I said before, he's already a solid putter. So now that he can get closer to the hole, because he's closer to the greens in the first place, has really helped him break out this year and really given him some shots to win some tournaments, such as he did, at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. I think he's been getting a lot of unnecessary hate I've seen this season, especially from the golf community. Mainly, like on Instagram, I'll go on there, and I think it's from that mainly, because the PGA, they post about him as much as, they post about him as much as, ESPN or Bleacher Report posts about LeBron. It's been, every other post it seems like has been a Bryson post. So I get it, but don't get mad at Bryson for that. It's not his fault that he's getting recognized for all the hard work that he's put in. And, the PGA recognizes, hey, we have a big rising star here who has the potential to win more majors or a major down the road, and he's putting on a show. Isn't this what golfers have wanted to see? Someone young, exciting, who just mashes the ball but still does well? I don't get it. I think he gets a lot of unnecessary hate. He worked his butt off this offseason, and it's really paid off a lot. And I can't wait to see what's up and coming for this bright young star in the game. So that's someone who mashes the ball and putts well. And then someone else who I should have put on the watch list for the young guys who also mashes the ball is Cameron Champ. 25 years old. He shot an 8 under this tournament. Tied for 10th. He shot a 71 his first round. Followed up with a 64, then a 67, and then a 70 to finish it out. And I think he is the longest driver on the tour. Bryson is the one who's really challenged him this year for that, but in the past, it's always been him. He averages 321 yards off the tee, giving him 1.06 strokes gained from there. It looks effortless. He gets so much power from his hips and his swing. His shoulder goes so deep on the way back. It's honestly something to watch. It's so effortless. He unwinds all that power, and he looks so good doing it. Now, for as good as he is power-wise, he's just as bad accuracy-wise. And that has been his main issue ever since he's come on the tour, really. Especially in his approach shots. Those 6, 7, 8, 9 iron shots have really not done him any favors. Although, to be fair, his 6 iron is like someone's 4 iron, probably. And that's really where he comes into issues, is his accuracy. So this weekend especially, one shot that really sticks out that I managed to watch is on the 15th. He drove it right behind a tree. His ball landed right behind the tree, forcing him to sort of chip out into the fairway, concede a bogey. Going into the final round, he was tied for second, I believe, or third. And he really had a chance to do well in the final standings of things. But it was really that shot right there, I think, that derailed the day for him. And I think that's really a big issue with him, is his approach. But his driver and his putting is decent as well. He's not too shabby when it comes to putting. He's nothing insane either, but he had a really nice 56-foot putt this weekend on the 6th. I think that really shows what he could become as a putter. Could really become a great putter, but like I said before, biggest issue is still the approach shots. And at times, he just looks just flat out bad on that front. But with the big driver, that power can carry him through a lot of trouble. We've seen this before with golfers. Power can carry you through a lot of trouble, and that does well enough for him. And it'll be interesting to see what Cam Champ can do in the future. I'm rooting for the guy. Hopefully he does well. He mashes the ball. Always fun to see someone like that on the tour. So a surprise from the weekend came from another young guy, 24-year-old Scotty Scheffler. He would lead going into the last round, but eventually dropped to tie for 4th. As previously stated, he's only 24 years old. He tied for 10th, he shot 10 under this weekend. Shot a 66 his first round, then a 71, then a really nice 65. Finished out the day with a 68. And accuracy was really good this week. He was 12th in greens in regulation, hovering around 66 most of the weekend, averaging out to about a 69% total. And then he was 9th in driving accuracy with 61% driving accuracy this weekend. Putting was his main problem. Around the greens, big courses, that's really where you can see the lack of experience show for these young golfers. And that's the main reason you see young golfers struggle most of the time, is because they're not used to courses like this. Guys like Collin Morikawa and Cameron Champ, they did well at this course. I'm not saying that they're not great golfers, because Collin Morikawa, like I said before, I do think he's the future of the sport. But the reason why they do well, I believe, is because they're from California. They've grown up playing these types of courses, whereas Scotty Scheffler is from Dallas, Texas. He's from Texas, went to school at the University of Texas, so he really didn't get a lot of exposure to these California courses. So that's where I think the struggle really comes from in the putting department. But he's got a great future ahead of him. If he can keep putting well, that's his biggest thing. If he can get the putting well, in a good spot, keep with the solid performances, just get the putts to fall, and I really think you can see something special from him. Last young guy in the top 10, Xander Schauffele, showed up at the major as per usual for him. 26 years old, finished 8 under, tied for 10th. 66 the first round, shot a 70, then a 69, finished out the day with a 67. His approach shots have been excellent this year. He's set a 1.393 strokes gained from there. And he isn't crazy long or crazy accurate in the driving department, and he's just okay at putting. He doesn't have a negative for any of the strokes gained in these categories, and that's really the thing about Xander Schauffele, is that his approach is really good, and everything else is just okay. He ranges from just okay to really good when he's at his best. And when he's at his worst, it's never anything terribly bad. He's averaging 4.28 birdies this year per round. Per round. What am I saying? Which is 10th best. He's still 6th best in scoring average this year at 69.282. And this is really a hallmark of how he shows up at the majors. Since 2017 at the U.S. Open, which was his first major that he attended, he's had 10 majors he's played in and has finished top 6 5 times, and also a top 10 and a 16th thrown in there as well. He's really a model of consistency, I feel, on the tour. Always competitive, and he's someone I'd really love to see get a major at some point in his future. He's come in second multiple times at the majors, and I love Xander Schauffele. I love his game. I love his consistency. He's never bad at anything. It's just hard to find anything bad to say about Xander Schauffele. So the top 10 also had its share fare of vets, including 43-year-old Paul Casey. He would finish tied second, 11 under, shot a 68, then a 67, another 68, and finished off with a nice 66. He's always someone who's a class act, always playing with a smile on his face. He's one of the most likable guys on the tour. Always shows respect to the game, to the person he's playing with. He was super consistent this weekend. Stayed out of troubles. Stayed out of troubles. What am I saying? Stayed out of trouble. Only had 4 bogeys. One of them which was a double. That's the hallmark of how you play good golf right there. You know, staying out of trouble. Always parring out holes. Avoiding bogeys like the plague. That's how you do well on golf courses. He's a class act. Love watching Paul Casey do well. You also had Dustin Johnson, who came back in a big way this tournament after being hurt the past couple of weeks, the 36-year-old. Shot 11 under. He also tied for second. Shot a 69, then a 67, 65, then sort of mellowed out with a 68 in the last round. He hit the ball long as per usual. He averaged 305 yards off the tee, and he was putting really well this weekend, especially in rounds 2 and 3 when he had a ridiculous 4.3 strokes per gain and 5.4 strokes per gain in those categories respectively for rounds 2 and 3. Really good to see him doing well again. He's always a workhorse of the tour. He's going to show up to any tournament he can play at. Really good guy to watch, Dustin Johnson. Jason Day also had a really big weekend as well. Came back in an emphatic way. The 32-year-old shot a 10 under. He was tied for 4th, shot a 65, 69, a 70, and then finished out with a 66. And he's really turned it on the past couple of weeks. He posted 11 under at the Workday Charity Open, 9 under last week at the St. Jude Invitational. Had a bogey-free first and last round, as I said before. That's a hallmark of good golf. And while his putting has always been good, his approach and his iron shots were the best out of anyone this week. He had an average of 1.975 strokes across all 4 rounds. That's strokes gained, as well as having a green and regulation percentage of 76, the second best of the weekend. I would love to see him keep this going. He's had a great level of success the past couple of weeks, and hopefully he ends this year well, because he's been sort of a non-factor the past year or so. He's really had troubles. I remember he got a new hitting coach a while back, so maybe that's what's doing it for him. So hopefully he can stay consistent, do well. I love watching Jason Day golf. Great golfer. Also, Tony Finau. Hard-hitting Tony Finau kept up his good scoring this week. The 30-year-old shot a 10 under. He tied for 4th. He had a 67, then a 70, another 67, and then a 66. And he is a long ball hitter, right? He was 6th best in average driving distance this weekend at 305.25 yards. But it was his approach that really caused him to do so well. He was 2nd in approach strokes gained at 1.9. And he was 6th in greens and regulation at 72%. Really good to see him playing accurate golf as well as playing that powerful golf that he plays. And then after a long 3 weeks of being cut, after some solid outings after the restart, Justin Rose came back this weekend to take 9th place. The 40-year-old shot a 9 under. He shot a 66 to start. He shot 68s, pair of those, a 70, and then a 67. And then nothing really popped off the books this week if you look at his strokes gained, except for his putting. His putting was excellent. He finished 3rd in the field for strokes gained there at 1.78, and his approach was solid. Had some really great shots there. And it goes to show that good putting will always get you good results. Even if everything is kind of average, everything else is kind of average, which was the case for Justin this weekend. So it's really good to see him put in a good result and really bounce back in a big way. He's a nice guy to see on the tour doing well. And then the last older guy in the top 10 was the bucket hat wearing fan favorite Joel Damon, 32-year-old, shot 10 under, tied for 10th, shot a 69, pair of 68s, and then a 67 to finish. This is his best result since the restart. Finished 20th last week at St. Jude. Was super accurate with the driver, going 3rd best with a 64% driving accuracy, pairing with some great putting that gave him 6th best in strokes gained there at 1.4. Really good to see him doing well. Always rocking the shades and the bucket hat. He's really been having a rough go of it this year. And it's really good to see him this week and last week getting some results inside the top 20 and top 10. So overall, PGA Championship. So this reminds me that while golf is always good to watch, if nothing else is on, like was the case. It was really for a while, for me anyway, it was golf and Formula One were the only things really to watch. So golf is always a good sport to watch if there's nothing else going on the weekend. But major golf is always going to be must-watch television. All right, that's the end of the episode, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning in, watching, and listening. So next week, my plan is, for all you NBA guys out there, I know I haven't covered the NBA as well as I'd like to. I just find it's really been hard to make one segment with how fast it's moving, right? The NBA is moving really fast. Playoffs are starting this weekend, in fact. So next week, or this week rather, whenever you're watching this, I'll be doing a full episode just on the NBA. So I'm going to give my NBA playoff predictions. I'm going to give out my regular season awards, such as MVP, Most Improved Player, Coach of the Year, that type of stuff. And then I'm going to give out bubble awards as well. So the NBA is doing this as well. They're giving out bubble awards. I'm going to give out my bubble awards as well. So that's the plan for next week. And then later down the line, we'll see what happens. So once again, thank you all so much for tuning in and listening. My name is Jeffrey Anderson. Go follow the Sports Porch at Real Sports Porch on everywhere, Twitter, Instagram. Search up the Sports Porch on YouTube. Comment, like, subscribe. Go watch it. All that good stuff. My personal Instagram and Twitter are at JeffreyA2017. Go give me a follow there. And without further ado, thank you all so much for tuning in and watching once again. And I'll see you guys on the next episode.